So, Lone Rider here, and I wanted to talk about something that was in the news recently, at least reported on here in New Jersey. And that was a company that was planning to sell online plans for 3D printing firearm parts, and in fact, in some cases, whole firearms. And the politicians and the news people were all talking about how frightening this was. This is awful, and criminals and gangsters are just gonna go and get these blueprints and make their own guns, and they'll be untraceable and they'll be impossible to detect, and so on and so forth. Now, unless the guns are not going to fire metallic cartridges and metallic projectiles, I doubt they'll be impossible to detect in terms of, let's say, going through a metal detector and setting it off. I mean, my watch sets off a metal detector, okay? And, not even this one. My titanium watch sets off a metal detector, even though titanium's a non-ferrous metal. This isn't the titanium watch, but the one that is titanium. Why? Because the buckle is steel. So the little bitty buckle on the watch band sets it off. So you're telling me a cartridge, a projectile with the cartridge case and all that other stuff isn't, and okay, you could argue, well, the cartridge case, might be brass, right? But what about the springs? What about the firing pin? That stuff's got to be made out of metal. And in fact, generally speaking, we're not talking about, plastic guns. We're talking about just 3D printed guns, presumably out of metal. Maybe they're making them out of some other material. I don't know. Maybe they've taken a Marvel page out of Marvel Comics and they're making them out of adamantium. Who knows, right? Or the real world equivalent. But the truth is that it's not going to be undetectable unless it's essentially invisible. Because in addition to metal detectors at airports, we also have those X-ray scanners that people have to walk through that electronically disrobe you, and they can see if there are physical objects in your pocket. So if it has physical form, metal or not, it's going to show up. Anyway, I just find it hard to believe the amount of hysteria that's gone into a very simple thing. Oh, it's going to be undetectable. It's one thing to say it's not going to be, registered with the government. You're not going to have a license to buy it because all you're buying are blueprints. You're making the gun. I could see that argument, but to say it's going to be undetectable, like it's the invisible jet from Wonder Woman or something. I mean, oh God, grow up, politicians and news media. All right, this stuff doesn't even make sense when it's in a comic book. When you're talking about a real world, supposedly serious issue, there's a certain level of absurdity once it goes past. It's just kind of, you're not even talking truth meter anymore. You're not even talking BS meter. You're just talking laugh meter because it's funny. Okay, it's funny. What's not so funny is that people talk about basing laws and policy on that type of hysteria. That's kind of sad. Okay. But I didn't really so much want to belabor the point of it's going to be like undetectable, More I wanted to focus on the assertion that criminal lowlifes, gangsters, career thugs, people like that, dope dealers hanging out in the corner, pimps, people who might, run a B&E crew, robbers, muggers, that these type of people are going to get blueprints and manufacture a complicated mechanism with fairly high tolerances in their home. Do you know how much work is involved in that? It doesn't come out of the 3D printer in a usable condition. Parts still have to be hand fitted. Things still have to be filed. These criminals, there's a lot of reasons people choose the criminal life, but one of the common threads is that a lot of them aren't well educated. Some of them haven't even finished high school. So you're telling me a person like that is going to be able to read a schematic, right? Let alone operate the equipment to print from it, and then do all the careful hand fitting. You think a hophead's going to have the patience for that? You think some guy who's going to stick up a liquor store, so he can get the money to go score some dope because he's all jittery and stuff? You think he's going to have the patience to sit there and hand fit parts for a complicated mechanism that won't work if it's not done right? So it'll be completely harmless. And same thing with the guy standing in the corner selling dime bags or whatever. Do you really think that this person is going to sit there and manufacture, in the literal sense of a cottage industry, a functioning mechanical device in his home, a fully functioning firearm? I'm going to be honest. I don't think so. I mean, there may be criminals with a certain, you know, mechanical talent, but generally speaking, people become criminals. A lot of times, it's the quick and easy way to make a buck. Go to school, learn, labor, bust your butt trying to make some money, or just go and rob some guy. You know, go and rob some guy is the quick and easy way to make a buck. So, you have people who have, um, you know, they just don't want to work that hard, right? And they probably don't have the skill set. They probably don't have the patience. They may not have the sobriety in the case of, a dope head or something. And they're spending most of their time out on the street doing some guy who's out on the street corner selling dope or selling stolen car stereos or whatever. He's not going to have the time to sit there and hand file all these parts so they fit. Let alone work the thing to 3D print whatever parts get 3D printed. And frankly, there's no reason to, right? Because in spite of all the gun laws that make it hard for citizens to get guns, law-abiding citizens, most of these criminals know people they can buy guns from on the street. Hey, Pepe, you got a piece, right? And then they'll sell you a pistol, a handgun. So law-abiding citizens don't do that for two reasons. One, they abide by the rules. They respect the concept of law and order, so they may not like a law or a rule, but they're not just going to flagrantly go and break it. Two, they don't have a criminal background, so they've never been in trouble with the law before, and the idea frightens them. I don't know about you. I don't like the idea of going to prison or even being arrested. And then three, even if your standard law-abiding citizen wanted to break the law and just get a gun illicitly, he may not know what's he going to do? Post an ad on Craigslist? He doesn't have the requisite contacts. He doesn't know the right people. And in trying to randomly stumble into meeting the right people, he might inadvertently get himself in a spot where he's robbed or even killed. So, not going to end well. Here's the deal. The people who have the patience, the knowledge, and the requisite skill set to do this are hobbyists, firearms enthusiasts, people who are just curious to see what the process is like, etc. They're not the people who you need to worry about getting a gun because they don't want to hurt anybody with it. They don't want to use it for a crime. The people who you worry about getting their hands on weapons, the guy who's selling dope, the guy who's stealing car stereos, the guy who's going to break into your house, the guy who's going to mug somebody or shoot up a school. These people usually don't have the skill set, the knowledge, the education, the patience, maybe even the sobriety. They might be stoned. So, and they have no reason to go to all that trouble because they have, the option of buying the firearm illicitly from acquaintances. So, to try and say, well, we can't allow this because, several politicians have talked about, passing laws to prevent this. And one court, I think there was an injunction or a restraining order filed against the company, preventing them from, at least for a while, from releasing these plans online. Now, again, I don't understand if you want to say, well, we don't, we have systems in place so that law-abiding citizens have to jump through a ridiculous number of hoops, and we don't want them to find a way around that. That's fine. At least you're being honest. But don't pretend it has anything to do with keeping the guns out of the hands of criminals. Do you really think somebody with an 8th grade education and who spends all his time snorting coke and, he's out on the street corner mugging people or being a pimp or selling dope, do you really think he's capable of home manufacturing a complicated mechanical mechanism where all the parts have to fit together like clockwork to function? Somehow I don't think so. Okay. I work on bikes. I have worked on watches. At one point, I actually took apart a pocket watch and put it back together again, and it was actually running when I was done. Friends and family will come to me with things. Hey, can you replace this battery? Can you fix this bezel popped off? Stuff like that, because they know I'm good at tinkering. Same thing. I'm on a bike ride and somebody gets a mechanical. They come to me and they're like, can you help me? I've even not only have I assembled bikes from scratch in terms of building up mass-produced frames that were purchased as frames only and fitting them with the parts, I actually brazed a bike from scratch using tubing. We put it in a jig. I cut it. I was at my friend's shop. He helped me a little bit. He made the fork and he did all the little fittings, but I basically did the main frame. And I had never used an oxyacetylene torch for welding, for brazing prior to that. And yeah, the bike rides wonderful. I have it now. It's been painted and all the parts are on it. But yeah, I made that bike from scratch. Literally, we bought tubes in a box and I welded them together, brazed them together. So I'm mechanically inclined. I would be reluctant to try and make one of these guns. Okay. Um, just because if something goes wrong, you could lose a finger, you could lose an eye. Um, I think it would be a fun experiment, but it's a little, you're dealing with explosive pressures, and I'm going to leave that for somebody else to do if it becomes legal. Here's the thing to think about, though. Zip guns, anybody remember those? Just a little spring and a nail for a firing pin. Yeah, you only get one shot or two shots if it's double barrel. But the point is, if you just want to shoot somebody and steal their wallet or do whatever it is a criminal's going to do, I mean, do you think these guns that they're printing are going to be, like, have the same functionality as a modern mass-produced, let's say AR-15 or something, or SKS? No, no. They're fairly basic, a lot of them. And you know what? If somebody wants to manufacture a firearm themselves and they're comfortable taking that risk that it might blow up and they might lose an eye or something, they can do it. And in many places it's actually legal to make your own gun from scratch, as long as you're not somebody who's forbidden from having a gun per se, like let's say a convicted violent felon. Um, I think the rules on that vary depending on where you live in the United States, but the point is that people certainly have done it. Google homemade firearms, and you'll see a whole bunch of things, from stuff that looks like it might be a death trap if it's ever used, to things that look fairly well made. So if that's what you're concerned about, that's already a thing. It's been done by hobbyists. It's been done by firearms enthusiasts. It usually isn't done by criminals. Why? Well, again, they can just buy a secondhand gun if they want. They don't have to go through the rules. Now, I'm not saying because of that we shouldn't have rules. I mean, you could make the argument and say, well, criminals break rules, so let's not have rules for anything. The point is, in this particular case, the system that's set up largely infringes on the law-abiding. So is it a surprise that some law-abiding citizens might want to make their own? It's the same thing behind the concept of ghost guns. Somebody gets an 80% complete AR receiver and finishes it themselves and then buys the parts and puts it together. It's irrational to want to restrict that 80% receiver, which is called an 80% receiver precisely because it's only 80% finished. It's irrational to want to restrict that receiver, which isn't even functional as a receiver in the condition in which you purchase it, the same way you would restrict a firearm. That's what they're talking about. When they talk about restricting ghost guns, which are these kits you buy where you buy the unfinished part and then you buy the rest and put it together. When people talk about restricting those, they're talking about restricting them to the same level of a fully functional, fully assembled firearm. But the problem is it isn't. It's a single piece that doesn't even function in the condition it's in because it's not finished. So, but the reason people are against those, well, again, some criminal could just buy it and then do home gunsmithing and assemble the thing themselves. And the same logic applies. Do you really think some gangbanger with an 8th grade education is going to sit there and operate a lathe in his garage? Where do you think he's even going to get a lathe, right? I mean, or learn how to use one. Is he going to go to the local, community college or Votech and say, I'm trying to build illicit gun parts. Can you help me out here and teach me a machining class? I don't see that happening. Okay. I think the people that most folks worry about illicitly getting their hands on firearms aren't the people who are going to take this route. If they want an illicit gun, like I said, they're going to go to their buddy and say, hey, Pepe, you got a piece. If the people that you're worried about getting their hands on guns, this isn't an issue. For everybody else, the law-abiding citizens, it might be an issue, but they're law-abiding citizens. Why would you really care all that much if they have guns? Now, I understand where the government's coming from, and to some degree its supporters in the media. They've gone to great lengths to make it really a pain in the butt for law-abiding citizens to get guns in many areas of this country, places like New York, New Jersey, etc. So I totally understand when the media in a place like New Jersey is reporting on this, And of course, gun control being a political orthodoxy that pretty much everybody in the media is, in support of, this seems to undermine that. It's like, wait a minute, we've went to so much trouble to inconvenience law-abiding citizens, and here somebody is finding a way around that. Well, we can't have that, can we? We gotta inconvenience people. I mean, we went to a lot of trouble to inconvenience them. They can't just bypass that. So, if that's your rationale for demonizing this 3D gun blueprint idea and the company that wants to sell it, that's fine. Come out and say, you know what? We really don't want law-abiding citizens to find a way out of being trapped in the insidious processes that we've created that are really a pain in the butt. Okay, fine. If you object that much to firearms enthusiasts, collectors, hobbyists, people who might want a gun for sporting or self-defense purposes, to finding some way around all those, troublesome roadblocks you keep putting in their way, fine. At least come out and say that. But to come out and say, oh, we can't have this because criminals might do it. Again, how many doped up, drug dealing, home invasion crew running hopheads do you really think are competent machinists? How many of the the gangbanger on the street corner selling dime bags, do you really think he's going to be able to manufacture one of these in his home and actually have it do anything if he tries that except blow off his fingers? And do you really think that he's even going to bother when, again, because of the way the gun control is, he could just go and ask his buddy for buy a gun out of his trunk, whereas you or I aren't going to do that because we're not criminals, and even if we did want to, we don't know anybody who we could do that with, because we don't, in addition to not being criminals, we don't hang out with criminals either. So basically, before you run off half-cocked, no pun intended, and start hollering and screaming about how the sky's falling and, oh my God, we're all going to die because homemade guns. First of all, homemade guns have been a thing for years, ever since anybody invented a chunk of metal in a file. Secondly, if you're worried about criminals manufacturing a slightly more complicated mechanism that they could buy blueprints of with something like this, criminals aren't going to do that, okay? They're generally speaking, they don't want to work that hard. They probably don't have the education level, the skills, or even the sobriety, all right? And they have no reason to, which is the third thing, because they can just go and buy a gun on the black market, which I guess, it's not only a question of, well, if that's the case, then why crack down on and try to prevent this 3D printed gun blueprint idea? Even further than that, I'll suggest, then why have gun control at all? Why not just have one or two basic common sense rules about, like if you're convicted of a violent felony, let's say, you can't own a firearm. Or maybe even be more stricter. If you're really concerned about recidivism, if you're convicted of a violent felony that involves misusing a gun, you can't own a gun. Okay, that makes sense. And to do that, obviously, you'd have to do a background check to see if somebody has any criminal convictions. And maybe if you have any mental health issues, if you've ever been involuntarily committed or adjudicated not competent, something like that. But we passed that level of restriction a long time ago. Now we're in crazy land, essentially, as far as the rules for guns, especially in places like New Jersey. So, maybe in addition to saying, why get stirred up over this 3D blueprint thing? It's no big deal, basically. Maybe we should also ask, why get stirred up over gun control in general and access to guns in general? I don't know about you. When I think of firearms, I think of going to the shooting range and having a good time, or somebody going hunting or something like that. I don't think of horrible crime and violence and terrorist attacks and mass shootings and muggings and all that stuff. I'm not naive. I know that stuff happens, but that's not what I think of when I think of firearms. And if I do think of it, it's balanced by the fact that I know there's many more people who use firearms for legitimate things. And, if you're really worried about people misusing stuff, people are always going to misuse stuff. How many people are killed, by drivers in this country? I haven't seen a push to outlaw cars. Okay. So, this whole 3D scare, it's just, I think it's emblematic in many ways of the political establishment, if you want to call it, or the media's general take on firearms. The only thing they associate them with is bad. But also, it shows you how overboard they get when the subject does come to guns, because it's like, oh my God, some criminal could download blueprints and buy a 3D printer that costs thousands of dollars and then go and have it 3D printed and then have to take the parts and hand fit them and put them together according to the blueprints. And yeah, and while he's doing that, how's he going to be out selling his drugs, right? And not for nothing, but if he's going to spend, $2,000 on a 3D printer, why doesn't he just go down the street and spend $200 on a hot 9mm that was stolen from some guy? Seriously, bought off one of his criminal friends. I mean, it's almost like what they're worrying about is the least likely thing. I don't know if you ever heard the expression, when you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. Okay? The people talking about this 3D gun thing as if criminals are going to become master machinists in their spare time in between drug deals, when they have no reason to, because you could just go buy a gun from another criminal. It's almost as if they're saying, we hear hoof prints. Oh my God, zebras. Yeah, think horses first, guys, okay? I mean, what's more likely to happen? I don't know about you. I think it's fairly likely that somebody who's into mechanical gizmos, into tinkering, somebody who might be a hobbyist or a firearms enthusiast or somebody like that might indeed want to 3D print their own gun. I think it's very unlikely that some guy with an 8th grade education selling dime bags on the corner in a bad part of town is going to be able or willing to do that, or even have a reason to. So, in short, it's nothing to worry about. Don't panic and just forget about it. It's no big deal, Lone Rider out.